Hello and welcome to the Reviews Brothers. I've only had my Sega Saturn for about a year now, and I have to say I bloody love it. There's some fantastic games on there, and it really is a system that reminds me why I like playing games so much. Something else I love are movies, and of course there have been hundreds of video games based on movies, and as we all know, they're always really good. So I thought I'd check out a bunch of games for the Saturn that are based on movies. There aren't a huge amount, though that might be a blessing. Oh, and there are two that aren't here, which are Alien Trilogy and Die Hard Trilogy, because for some reason neither of them would load on my Saturn, despite the fact that I'm using real hardware and discs. I might need to invest in a new copy. Sad times. Anyway, how about I shut up, you press that subscribe button, and we take a look at some games. We are going to begin with Batman, so I guess Batman Begins. This one is Batman Forever, the arcade game. Oh boy. Batman Forever, the arcade game, is a port of just that, and it's a beat 'em up in the style of Streets of Rage or Final Fight, and on paper that should be great. I mean, it worked well enough for Batman Returns on the Super Nintendo, but this is a game made by Acclaim. I'm sure I used to like Acclaim. So yeah, it's a beat 'em up where you choose to play as either Batman or Robin in this 1 or 2 player game. Then you're thrown into 10 or so levels where you have to punch and kick bad guys in the face and stop the Riddler and Two-Face from taking over Gotham. Gameplay is exactly what you'd expect from a game like this. You move from left to right, then the screen will freeze and half a dozen enemies will show up. You've got a punch and a kick button, so you hammer those to do combos and pummel people into the ground. You also do have a jump and a block button, and don't forget the block, as you'll need it if you want to get anywhere. It takes a while to get used to, but it's actually very handy. As you fight, enemies will drop power-ups for you to collect, and this is where the game gets a bit crazy. There's all sorts of shit flying around all over the place. Some icons give you a power boost that fills a meter under your health. This levels you up and makes your attacks stronger, where you'll get a little scene of your character floating into the air and exploding into a rage ball. There's also weapons to collect, like batarangs and a bat rope, bat bowlers, and other things starting with bat. These have limited uses, but are usually pretty powerful. You use them by pressing the punch button, so if you want to save them, just kick everyone. There's also the Riddler and Two-Face icons. These can be either good or bad. Sometimes they'll shrink you or make you slower, other times you'll get bigger and more powerful. Sometimes you get points, sometimes you take damage. It's luck of the draw, which is kind of the point of Two-Face, I suppose. But the problem is that the gameplay is so twitchy and unbalanced that it's just plain batshit crazy, and it's hard to know what the hell is going on most of the time. There's often a load of enemies on screen at once, and it's surprisingly easy to lose track of your character in the dodgy, dark, blurry graphics. Enemies will quickly gang up on you, and you can barely take a few punches before dying, and you can even get trapped between 2 or 3 enemies with literally no option other than to take damage and most of the time just die, and the amount of random stuff going on all the time really makes this an assault on your senses. Boss fights are the expected cheap affair, with them doing a ton of damage to you and often ignoring your attacks altogether, but they can also be cheesed quite often with a bit of blocking and the classic jump kick method that works in a lot of games like this. Between levels you can select from various bonuses that you get depending on how well you do on the level before. These range from having unlimited ammo for an item, having stronger attacks and things like that. The game uses some pretty ropey pre-rendered graphics, and it's not particularly pleasant to look at. Batman and Robin are wearing costumes that look like they've come out of a cheap Halloween store, and they don't even match the costumes from the movie. Enemies are a mixture of pre-rendered sprites and digitized ones, which is just odd, but none look particularly good, and a lot of the animation here is terrible, with just a few frames for pretty much anything. The controls aren't terrible, but your character is so slidey that it does feel strange to control, and the jerky animation can mean timing your attacks isn't as easy as it should be. Overall, this just isn't fun to play. There's times where I think I'm having fun, but most of the time I just don't know what the hell is going on, and I realise I'm just hammering an attack button while trying to find out where the hell I am, and hoping for the best. This is one that you should bat avoid. Here is Casper from Interplay. Based on the movie where the friendly ghost just wants to make friends with Christina Ricci and Bill Pullman, and who can blame him? While his evil uncles are there doing everything they can to scare the pesky humans out of their house. You play as Casper throughout the game, and your mission is to explore your large mansion and its grounds, where you'll need to find various keys and other items in order to unlock doors, because apparently you've forgotten how to go through walls. Opening new rooms gets you more items, some of which you'll need to give to the fleshy feckers so they'll be your mates. Of course, your annoying uncles are also in various rooms throughout the house, and they'll chase you and scare you and even attack you, making you re-dead if you don't do what they ask or bring them certain things, or sometimes you'll even have to find a way to get them out of the room that they're in. So the whole game is essentially a puzzle fetch quest. You'll need to use some of the items that you find in certain places to solve simple puzzles, and other times you'll need to uncover hidden switches or buttons that open up new areas of the level. There aren't many levels, only 3 or 4, but they're all pretty damn long. Well, actually they aren't. The whole thing can be beaten in less than 2 hours if you know what you're doing, but this was the first time I played it, and progress was slow, but sort of consistent, and I have to say, I actually found myself enjoying this game way more than I expected. As you progress, you'll also gain new abilities, like being able to go through grates in the house, which takes you to new areas. These are obviously quite handy and required if you want to complete the game. Finding the coloured keys is your main goal though, as they open the various coloured doors throughout the house. Something that is a bit annoying though is that most of the doors you go through lead to a loading screen, and you'll find yourself getting sick of looking at the loading screen between every bloody room. Sometimes you'll go a while in the larger areas, but be warned, there is a lot of loading. The graphics here aren't too bad. It's a mix of pre-rendered characters and sprites. It can be a little dark, and there were times where I missed things because I just literally couldn't see them and I had to bump up the brightness on my TV. The animation isn't too bad, though Casper only has one expression on his face which really annoys me, his stupid grin, and it should have changed when your evil uncles are around, and it's just a bit daft looking. The controls are fine, for the most part you're just exploring the mansion. You've got a button to pick stuff up and a button to use stuff and a couple of buttons to cycle through your inventory, and that's all you really need. If you press the use button on a bit of environment, you'll get a bit of info on what it is, which is sometimes a clue and sometimes just telling you what you're looking at. This can be handy every now and then when you're stuck. Now, I'm well aware that this isn't exactly the best game around, and it's certainly not one I'd recommend spending loads of money on. If you find it for cheap though, or can play Saturn games any other way, I would say it's worth a few hours of your time if you like a slower paced puzzle. Congo, the lost city of Zinj, is based on the Congo movie about some big old gorillas and other jungle wildlife that don't take too kindly to a bunch of pesky westerners turning up to ransack a diamond mine that they want to use to help make a communications laser. And the game captures the essence of the movie perfectly. It starts off with some particularly fantastic FMVs showing a survivor of a plane crash who has a fever and is running low on supplies, yelling about all sorts of weird stuff happening in the jungle. Your job is to follow the messages left in the recordings to track him down and his team to see if you can save them. Then you start playing, and surprisingly it's a first-person shooter, where you have to explore the jungle to find the wrecked expedition and eventually the diamond mine itself. The levels are all fairly short and packed with evil enemies, all of which are crazed, mutated looking wildlife. You get giant spiders, mosquitoes, lizards and gorillas to name just a few, as well as evil totem poles that will shoot poison darts at you. As well as this, there's often traps in the jungle, with the ground itself moving out all over the place, which will sometimes help you out, but other times lead you into a nasty trap filled with more nasties. The thing is though, even though you are meant to be in a big dense jungle, you can't explore really, and actually just have a series of narrow paths to follow. These are filled in as you go on the map in the bottom corner, so you know where you've been and where is new, though you will still have to do some backtracking to get items you might have missed or didn't need at the time. All the while, loads of enemies will come at you from just about every angle, ambushing you from the jungle canopy. You do get little dots on the map to show you where enemies are, which is handy, because a lot of the time everything just looks like a mess and it can be disorientating, especially if you've been shot by one of the totem poles when you go into a crazy drug-filled haze. You start the game with a pistol. This has unlimited ammo, but if it does get down to 0, there is a second or two delay between shots, which will probably mean you'll take some damage. You'll also find a machine gun, a rifle, shotgun and a rocket launcher among other generic weapons. These all have the usual firing modes, but don't really feel much different to use other than the power and rate of fire, so I guess they do feel different. Though what I mean is that unlike other shooters, you don't ever feel like you need a certain weapon for a certain situation, and you can just make do with any of them as the enemies are all just brain dead and wander towards you like suicidal bastards. There's no tactics required here, just point and shoot until dead. Graphically, the game is pretty damn terrible. I mean, look at it. The environments are ugly and incredibly repetitive. It takes way too long before you start seeing something other than the same junglescape, and by then you only have a couple of levels left. The enemies all look awful with some very low resolution pixels, even the weapons look bad. Basic 3D models that even cut off when you're turning and shooting so you can see where they stopped rendering it. The frame rate is pretty bad as well, and rarely very much in the double figures I'd say. There really isn't much to shout about here. The controls are sluggish, you have a button that makes you do a 180 which is a godsend. Other than that though, it's just slow and unresponsive, though it is actually still kind of playable. The thing is with this game is that it's a bit of a guilty pleasure for me. It is not a good game in any sense of the word. It looks bad and plays bad, but I wanted to keep going back to see what other abominations appeared, and this is one of those games that I would say is so bad that it's good. Do not pay money for it, burn yourself a copy. You can beat the whole thing in just a couple of hours, and I'll be honest, I had a blast doing so, laughing pretty much the whole time. Get some like-minded mates around to experience it with you, and I reckon you'll be smiling the whole time. There's a few Die Hard games, and I've talked about them all already in my Die Hard games video, but I'll mention Die Hard Arcade briefly. It's a 3D beat 'em up, very loosely based on the Die Hard movie. So loosely in fact that depending on what version you play, it's not even a Die Hard game at all. It's 1 or 2 players, and you play as John McClane, or if you're player 2, some woman. And you have to rescue the president's daughter who's been kidnapped and being held in a large tower block, John's favourite location. So you go from room to room, beating the snot out of anyone you see, using not only your fists and feet, but a whole range of weapons that you find, from brooms and TVs to rocket launchers, and even spray paint that you can use to stun people with. Once you've smashed everyone's face in, you move on to the next area. Sometimes between rooms you get a cool little cutscene where you see your character running, and then you have a quick time event requiring you to press either kick, punch or jump. Get it right and you'll defeat the enemy or dodge whatever it is that's in the way. I actually quite like these bits and they look great. The combat in the game is fine, if a little clunky and stiff. You have a punch and kick button and can do a fair few combos. You can also grab people for throws and do some jump attacks. In fact, I found that I do all sorts of random new attacks even when I wasn't trying to. The variety is surprisingly high. Enemies can be very tough, mainly due to your slow movement, and there's often quite a few knocking around at any one point, so they can surround you to make your life a bit of a misery. You don't really have a block, which would have been very handy, but you will learn to dodge and jump out of the way of enemies quickly enough. The graphics here are definitely a bit ropey. They do have a 32-bit 3D charm to them, and they are bright and colourful, but very low polygon, so do have a few clipping issues on the character models, and some of the scenery is kinda laughable. However, I do really enjoy playing this one. I've never actually managed to beat it, and I tend to get to about the same place every time, though I reckon if I put a few more hours in, I'll be able to get through it, and I would recommend giving it a go. I think it's good fun, especially with a friend. For more on this game, and just about every other Die Hard game available on consoles, make sure you check out my Die Hard Games video. Dragonheart Fire and Steel is another one from Acclaim, and is based on the movie franchise that probably should have stopped after the first movie. It's a 2D action adventure where you play as the boring sounding dragon slayer Sir Bowen, who is out to kill a king that's being a bastard, as well as 7 bastard dragons that are being bastards. But you meet one dragon that's the last of its kind, and sort of make friends with it. So yeah, the game is a 2D side-scroller with some amazing digitized graphics that we'll touch on later. You move from left to right and you fight a handful of dumbass soldiers, barbarian looking things and bandits until you get far enough to the right to end the level. But it's not as easy as it sounds, though not for any good reason. There are traps in the levels as well, like spikes, bottomless pits and swinging logs that will do a fair bit of damage to you if you're not careful. But the enemies here are the main thing to look out for. You have a sword that you can swing, as well as arrows you can use later on. These have to be bought in the store and in between levels, and you get money by killing people, although sometimes you'll find it by breaking things in the levels. Most of the time when you're attacking, you just need to hammer the attack button to swing your sword. This can also be swung upwards or by crouching. There are combos you can do, but you've got to be careful as you do have a stamina meter which runs out pretty fast. So swinging your sword 5 or 6 times in a row will result in you being unable to move for a few seconds. Your best bet is to swing once, wait for a second for the enemy to finish recoiling, and then swing again. This will pretty much permanently stun any enemy and ensure you have enough stamina. You can upgrade your health and your stamina as you play as well. The combat is just so repetitive and dull though. It's pretty cheap and just not that fun to play. It doesn't help that the controls are so slow and unresponsive, and the hit detection is pretty crap. You'll probably miss as many attacks as you'll hit. It's really not good. The level design is also really dull, with a handful of platforms here and there, which for the most part can be ignored as you just run to the right. You can skip over some of the enemies, but for most of them, the game won't let you jump over them, even when you should be able to. Though I suppose the combat is the only thing that you have to do in this game, so they've got to make you do it. Also, there are levels with water in them, and sometimes you can walk in these water puddles, other times it's instant death. Of course, there's no way to know which way it's going to go until you actually get in the water, so I recommend avoiding all water where possible. There's barrels and boxes in the levels as well. You can smash these open and there'll be items like health, money or power-ups. There's things that make you invincible, as well as power-ups that make you kill enemies in just one hit for a short amount of time, if the game lets you hit them, that is. There's also bosses, which are the evil dragons, and these are about the most fun you'll have with the game. It's just a case of learning their patterns and cheesing your way to victory, though I did enjoy a couple of the ones that I fought, but that was short-lived. Every now and then you even get a flying level when you're on the back of your dragon mate, and this is kind of like the never-ending story. These levels are just FMV sequences, and every now and then you'll get a prompt on the screen that tells you what direction on the D-pad to press. There's nothing else to them, and they don't really add anything to the game at all, though I guess they don't look that terrible. And speaking of looking terrible, pretty much everything here does, I suppose. The digitized characters are awful, with some really cheap looking costumes, the animation is jerky and barely any frames of animation, and it also makes the combat and controls pretty dire. Unlike Congo, this game is just bad and not fun to play. Don't bother with this one, even for a laugh, unless you're a masochist like me. Time for one of my favourite movie monsters now, with Godzilla Archipelago Shock. I think I said that right. This is a strategy game with the awesome Godzilla series that was only released in Japan, which is a shame. As it's all in Japanese, I don't really know what the hell's going on, though it's Godzilla, so it's not hard to figure out, I guess. Here you control an army, and every mission sees you fighting against Godzilla and usually another monster or two. It's all done in a real-time strategy sort of way, and you have to command your troops and move them around some quite small level boards, where you've got to defend cities, save people, and annoy the monsters enough with your weapons so they bugger off. Unfortunately, I found it quite hard to do, as I couldn't really read any of the menus, and a lot of the things I tried to do just wouldn't work, and I had no idea why. I did manage to force my way to the third level, and it's a real shame that I couldn't understand it, because believe it or not, I actually had fun with the very little that I could do. The monsters do their own thing and wander about, and even have fights amongst themselves. Meanwhile, you choose from an ever-growing number of troops, tanks, planes, etc., and tell them where to go and what to attack and defend. It all moves at a decent pace, and if I could actually understand the menus, I reckon it would have been a hell of a lot of fun. The graphics are decent 2D sprites, and the monsters all look great, I think, and they have their iconic sounds, which I love. And the music is right out of the movies, and it's that weird but kind of cool upbeat military stuff from the Japanese movies. I can't really tell you more than that, as it was very hard to brute force myself to where I got to. But if you can read Japanese, I would actually recommend this one. It seems like a fun strategy game that's probably quite tricky, even if you can understand it. Sadly, it's not friendly to anyone who can't read Japanese. Independence Day was an absolute smash hit when it was released in the cinema, Will Smith and Jeff Goldblum having more charisma than we can all dream of, and one of them still does. It was no surprise that it got its own tie-in video game, and on paper it should have been great. The source material is perfect for a video game. Aliens invade Earth, so pilots have to fly around taking down spacecrafts and blowing up motherships, and that's exactly what the game gets you doing. It's just a shame that it's done pretty badly. It takes you through various locations around America, where you're put in some kind of small arenas that have a mothership and a load of smaller ships that you have to take down. You get a handful of other objectives that don't change much between levels, and are basically a case of shooting down enemies, blowing up certain buildings or landmarks like communication towers, and eventually blowing up the mothership when it conveniently opens its giant laser weapon. Sometimes you'll have other things to do, like making sure certain crafts don't get shot down, or even flying into alien teleporter things which take you to strange areas with more things to shoot, though none of it is particularly exciting. You can choose from a few different aircrafts for most missions. Some of these are unlocked as you play, others are unlocked by finding hidden icons somewhere within the level. This is a nice touch and it gives you an excuse to explore a bit. The trouble is, actually playing the game doesn't feel very good at all. Now the planes don't really control too badly to be fair, and they all control a little differently. Getting around though is a pain in the ass, thanks to some really terrible graphics and draw distance. You can barely see 2 feet ahead of you, even when you can, the graphics are so blurry that it's hard to know what the hell you're looking at anyway. The pop in here is awful, and finding the enemy aircraft is almost impossible. You do have a radar, but this barely helps. It says where they are, but you never know if they're above you or below you or where they are. Most levels have a roof in the form of the alien mothership, which actually does match up to the movies, but this is covered in turrets that will start firing at you before you even know they're there, and you've got no way to really avoid their shots. Your planes do have a few weapons. There's a machine gun which is all but useless as the bullets take time to travel, so even on the rare occasions that you do see an enemy, by the time you've shot at them and your bullets are where they are, they've buggered off. You do have rockets which will lock on, but you get a limited supply of these. Now there are items like ammo and health dotted around the levels that you can fly through to get more, but these are hard to find and they don't even pop up on your radar. I found it easier just to throw on some cheats so I didn't run out. In fact, that was really the only way I could get anywhere in this game. It's not even particularly difficult, it just takes forever to do anything because it's so easy to get lost even though the arenas are kind of tiny. I really do think that this could have been a fun game if it was released on a later system, and I wouldn't have objected to a brand new Independence Day game. It's perfect material, but this one is just a bad game that's no fun to play. It looks terrible, sounds boring, and won't keep you wanting to play for more than a few minutes. The Lost World Jurassic Park was a film that divided people. Some people I knew loved it, others hated it. I quite enjoyed it. The first movie got loads of games, so it was expected that the second one would do so as well, and this is what we got. It's a 2.5D platform game that, interestingly, doesn't bother to follow the movie at all, or even feature any of the human characters. Instead, you play as a variety of dinosaurs, and your objective for every level is just basically to get as far to the right as possible until the level ends. You start off as a small compy and you explore some quite large levels that have a few segments to them, running in and out of the scenery which is all made up of polygons. You have to watch out for other dinosaurs like raptors and other bastards that I don't know the names of. Some of them fly, some have 2 legs, some have 4 legs. There's also spiky plants that you need to keep an eye out for, as they'll even damage you if you're not careful. The enemy dinosaurs start out pretty dangerous, but you'll soon learn to use your variety of attacks to good effect. You've got a few bites that you can do, and if you attack while running, you do a cool claw attack that's pretty powerful. To get your health back, you can munch away at any of the dinosaurs or insects that you've killed, which is a cool idea. There are some dinosaurs that are too big though, and these ones you can't even hurt, and you've just got to run away from them. In fact, you can just run away from most enemies if you want to. Doing this can make some of the levels last only a few minutes, which isn't a bad thing. After way too long, you eventually stop being a compy and get to control a raptor, then a human, and eventually a massive T-Rex. But the game does take far too long to get going to these points. The compy levels take up most of the game, and the other dinosaurs only have a few levels each, despite being much more fun to play as. Not the humans though, they suck. I only got to try one of them. It's a commando bloke armed with a gun and a grappling hook, and he controls incredibly badly. You can shoot dinosaurs, which is effective, but trying to jump, climb or use the grappling hook is just a real pain in the ass to do, and I died a lot thanks to shoddy controls. The levels also have things you can collect in them, like claws, DNA and extra lives. These unlock various things in the game and are pretty well hidden in the levels. Thankfully, you can go back to any of the levels that you've beaten through the options menu, so you can go back to find them all if you really want to. Now, the game seems fine when you're looking at it, but not really when you're playing it. The controls are really stiff, but the characters are also kind of slippery, so it's a weird combination. The platforming is pretty much just terrible, and the collision detection is really bad, making it tough to be precise at any point. And this is the real problem, as there's some very small platforms that you'll need to jump on, but most of the time you'll jerk around in the air and end up falling off it, or sometimes you do land on it, but just slide off anyway. This is very frustrating, especially as there is loads of fall damage, which is really where I died a lot, probably more than from enemies. Graphically, this is not a real looker. It's not bad for 3D on the Saturn, and the animation is pretty good. It's just very low polygon, and the textures are very pixelated with a lot of pop-in despite being 2.5D. Also, the field of view is just too small. Your characters are large on screen, but that mainly means that you don't get to see far around you, meaning it's easy to miss platforms and you'll have to rely on a lot of leaps of faith, usually ending in death. The sound and music though are amazing, and they sound like they're right out of the film. Overall, I wouldn't say this is a terrible game, but it does have quite a few issues and is quite annoying a lot of the time. I wouldn't recommend spending more than £20 on it, but if you find it cheap and love dinosaurs like I do, then you might get a bit of enjoyment out of it. Classic basketball movie Space Jam got itself a game on home consoles, once again from Acclaim. Jesus. The story of the movie goes that a bunch of cartoon space aliens have challenged the Looney Tunes to a basketball match, the winner of which gets not vaporized, or something along those lines. It's been a while. So the Looney Tunes have put together a team to take on the Monstars, and to help them they went to the real world and recruited Michael Jordan, who was the biggest and best basketball bloke of the 90s. Or I'm guessing he was, I'm English. The game actually just ignores the plot of the film, which is fine if you ask me. Instead, it's basically just a reskin of NBA Jam, which isn't a bad thing. There's only 2 game modes here. There's a single match, which you can play against the computer or against a friend. Or there's a tournament where you choose your team and then play a series of matches until you are the champ. All the games here are 3-on-3. You can choose to play as either the Toon Squad, featuring Michael Jordan, Bugs, Lola, Taz, Daffy and more of your favourite cartoon characters, or you can play as the Monstars, and I don't know any of their names. Each character has their own stats, strengths and weaknesses. You got speed, rebound and shooting, so you'll want to get a mix of players that have a good amount of each. If you're on the Toon Squad though, Michael Jordan is just overpowered, having full stats for all 3, so he'll basically always be on your team. Strangely, if you are the Monstars, they don't have an equivalent, and in fact their stats seem to be noticeably worse, so I don't know why you'd ever play as them unless it's in 2-player. You only have 4 buttons to worry about: run, shoot, sprint and pass. If you're not on the ball, then you can use these to jump and block or to try and slap the ball out of your opponent's hand. Gameplay is simple, you just throw the ball in the basket, but for me this game has the same problems that all basketball games do. This is that most of the time it seems to be a case of you just take it in turns to score baskets, as tackling here is very hard. It's easy to lose sight of who has the ball and where your characters are. So for me it tends to be that I'll score a basket, then they will, then I will, then they will. Sometimes I'll get lucky and get a 3-pointer. Now it is possible to get the ball off the other team, but it's much harder than it should be, and it seems like your tackles, if that's what they call them in basketball, miss most of the time. You can do some crazy slam dunks which always look really cool, but these don't give you any extra points, and other than this there isn't really anything else that makes this different from any other basketball game. There's no crazy power-ups or anything like that. It is still fun to play, and I did enjoy going through some tournament mode, even though I never managed to win it. One idea I do kind of like is that there are mini-games between quarters that you can play, and if you complete them you get stat bonuses in the following quarter. This is a cool idea. Sadly, most of them control like ass and are much harder than they need to be thanks to poor controls. They also feel very cheap, and clearly little effort was put into them. They kind of remind me of the free games you'd get on CDs with PC magazines in the early 90s. It is a blast to play in multiplayer though, and really what the game's designed for. It's a shame that you can't mix up the teams and have a combination of Looney Tunes and Monstars. That would have been a nice way to get them all used a bit more. The graphics are fine, there's some nice animation, but there's not really much better than what we saw on the 16-bit consoles. It would have been nice to see a bit more effort here. But yeah, it's Acclaim. Though if you do like NBA style basketball action, you might want to give this a go. And finally for today, here is Street Fighter the movie, the game. Based on the hit adaptation of everyone's favourite fighting game, Street Fighter 2, the game follows the plot of the movie, which sees Special Forces hero Huile on a mission to take down the evil M. Bison. So yeah, it's a one-on-one fighting game, and you know what? It is nowhere near as bad as the over-dramatic internet weebles will have you believe. In fact, it's quite fun. There's a few game modes here. You've got a story mode, where you do follow the plot of the movie kind of, and you play as Guile on his mission to fight Mr. Adams. Here you're given choices of where you want to go as part of the story. This determines who you fight, which is cool and gives the game a bit of replay value. Even though it doesn't actually make a difference to the story, you just see different scenes and fight different people. Then there's the arcade mode, which is your classic fighting game setup. You choose from any of the characters and then fight everyone else until you've kicked them all in the knackers. As you can see, the game uses digitized characters, and as far as I can tell, they are the actors from the movies, which means that you actually do get to play as Jean-Claude Van Damme as Guile, and more importantly, Kylie Minogue as Cammy. Ooh yeah. This makes the game worth playing on its own if you ask me. All of the characters from Super Street Fighter 2 are here as well, and there's a new character called Sawada, which legend says is a character created by Capcom for the movie. They wanted the actor here to play Ryu, but because he couldn't speak English he wasn't able to, so he had to have a much smaller part. Because this is based off of the Super Street Fighter 2 engine, the gameplay actually plays pretty well, though not quite up to the standards of the other games. You've got these same special moves and combos that you do there, so if you're familiar with any of the Street Fighter games, you'll pretty much be able to get stuck right in, and it really is fun to play. The game is not a looker though. The digitized sprites are very poorly done, and you can see outlines of bits that they've missed. They also have some pretty jerky animation, which kind of matches the non-digitized games in the 16-bit era, but for a 32-bit era game, this should have been much better. Hell, even Mortal Kombat has more frames of animation and better digitized characters. Each character does have their own level to fight on, and these are all digitized as well. Some look alright, but some are just laughable with some dodgy JPEGs thrown in on levels that look thrown together. But as I keep saying, actually playing this game isn't that far off of a regular Street Fighter 2 game. I will say that it is firmly at the bottom of pretty much any pile of Street Fighter games, but it is perfectly playable and actually enjoyable. This is a good, silly bit of fun, but for the price it's going for, you're better off with just about any other version of Street Fighter. So there you go, a bunch of games for the Sega Saturn that are based on movies. It's not all of them, but I think it's most of them. Be sure to check out my Alien games and Die Hard games videos where you get to see my reviews of those games, though they are the PlayStation versions, so take that with a grain of salt. What are your favourite movies on the Saturn, or any other console for that matter? Be sure to let me know in the comments below. Now, all that's left for me to say is thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.